They wanted to euthanize her, but what this tiny bobcat kitten did left everyone in tears. At first, she was just another wild animal brought in, broken and defenseless. But then something happened that no one could explain, against all odds. One woman refused to let her go, and in that choice, she uncovered a truth far bigger and far darker than anyone expected. As danger closed in, this fragile creature revealed a strength that would change everything. What could a wild bobcat possibly do that would bring grown men to their knees and leave an entire town speechless? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Pine Valley Animal Control Center, casting long shadows across the sterile examination room. The air was thick with antiseptic smell and tension as to animal control officers, carefully carried in a small carrier. Inside, a tiny bobcat kitten lay motionless, its silver gray fur matted with dirt and blood. Collie Renard, a 24-year-old veterinary intern, felt her heart skip a beat as she observed the injured creature. Its small chest rose and fell, with shallow breaths, a sign of life that sparked hope within her. The kitten couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, and despite its wild nature, it looked so vulnerable and innocent. Found it by the highway, one of the officers explained, his voice gruff but tinged with sympathy. Mother was nowhere in sight, probably hit by a car. Dr. Marcus, the lead veterinarian, stepped forward and peered into the carrier. His face hardened into a familiar mask that Collie had come to recognize during her 6 months at the center. It was the expression he wore when difficult decisions had to be made. Protocol is clear on this one, he stated firmly, reaching for the euthanasia kit on the nearby counter. We don't rehabilitate predators. Collie's throat tightened. But sir, she protested, her voice barely above a whisper, the kitten's injuries don't look severe. With proper care, Ms. Renard. Dr. Marcus cut her off, his tone sharp, but not unkind. You know the rules. Wild predators, especially big cats, can't be domesticated. Even if we could save it, we'd never be able to release it safely back into the wild. The kitten stirred slightly, letting out a tiny mew that pierced Collie's heart. She moved closer to the carrier, her green eyes meeting the bobcat's cloudy blue ones. In that moment, something shifted inside her, a connection she couldn't explain, an overwhelming desire to protect the small life. I'll take responsibility, she heard herself say, her voice stronger now. Please, Dr. Marcus, let me try to save her. The room fell silent. The animal control officers exchanged uncomfortable glances while Dr. Marcus stared at her, with a mixture of disappointment and concern. You're risking your internship, he warned. The board won't approve of this. We have protocols for a reason. Collie's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve remained firm. I understand the consequences, she replied, carefully lifting the carrier. But I can't stand by and watch us euthanize an animal that has a chance at survival. Looking down at the injured kitten, she whispered softly, I'll call you Ash. The name seemed fitting for the silver-gray creature who had risen from the ashes of what should have been certain death. Dr. Marcus removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. Collie, think about what you're doing. This isn't some stray house cat. It's a wild predator that could never be safely released. Then we'll find another solution. Collie insisted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. There are wildlife sanctuaries, rehabilitation centers. There has to be a better option than euthanasia. She could see the conflict in her supervisor's eyes, the battle between protocol and compassion. The animal control officers stood awkwardly by the door, waiting for final instructions. Dr. Marcus sighed heavily. I'll have to report this to the board. You understand that? Collie nodded, holding the carrier closer. Inside, Ash stirred again, her tiny paw pressing against the carrier's gate. I understand, sir, and I'll accept whatever consequences come from this decision. The weight of her choice settled on her shoulders, but as she looked down at the fragile creature in her care, she knew she couldn't have done anything else. Sometimes, she realized, doing the right thing meant taking the harder path, even if it meant putting everything she'd worked for at risk. The stairs to Collie's third-floor apartment had never seemed so daunting. She clutched the carrier close, trying to minimize its movement as she climbed each step. Inside, Ash shifted restlessly, letting out occasional soft growls that made Collie's heart race. What if one of her neighbors heard? Finally reaching her door, she fumbled with her keys, careful to keep the carrier level. Almost there, little one, she whispered. The lock clicked, and she slipped inside, closing the door quickly behind her. Her small apartment felt even tinier now. The living room doubled as her dining area, with a compact kitchen tucked into one corner and a narrow hallway leading to her bedroom and bathroom. Where would she keep a wild bobcat kitten? Collie set the carrier down in her living room and opened its door. Ash remained huddled in the back, golden eyes wide with fear. "It's okay," Collie said softly. "You're safe here." The next few hours proved challenging. Ash refused to eat, turning away from the special formula Collie had brought from the clinic. The kitten's injured leg needed cleaning and bandaging, but every time Collie approached, Ash would bare tiny teeth and growl. "Come on, sweetie," Collie pleaded, holding out a small piece of chicken. "You need to eat to get stronger." Her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Morrison, final warning. Return the animal tomorrow or face consequences. Collie's hands shook as she set the phone down. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her shoulders. Years of study, mountains of student debt, her dream of becoming a veterinarian, all of it hung in the balance. A scratching sound drew her attention. Ash had managed to limp out of the carrier and was trying to hide behind Collie's secondhand couch. No, no, no. Collie lunged forward, but the kitten had already wedged itself into the tight space. A knock at her door made her freeze. Through the peephole, she saw a tall man with camera equipment slung over his shoulder. She opened the door cautiously, keeping her foot wedged against it. "Can I help you?" The man smiled warmly. "I'm Jonas Hale. I heard about what happened at the clinic. Today, I was photographing birds near there when I overheard some staff talking." He lowered his voice. "About the Bobcat Kitten." Collie's grip tightened on the door. "I don't know what you're talking about. I want to help," Jonas said quickly. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years as a photographer. I've helped rehabilitate injured animals before. Please, let me assist." Something in his earnest expression made Collie hesitate. Behind her, she heard another scraping sound as Ash moved further behind the couch. "I'm not supposed to have," she began. "I know," Jonas interrupted gently. "But sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the legal thing. At least let me look at the kitten." Collie bit her lip, then stepped back, allowing him inside. Jonas entered quietly, setting his camera bag down with careful movements. His experienced eyes scanned the apartment, quickly spotting the carrier and then the gap behind the couch. "First thing," he said, keeping his voice low and calm, "we need to create a safe space. Something enclosed but not cramped. Do you have a bathroom?" For the next hour, Jonas helped Collie transform her small bathroom into a temporary wildlife sanctuary. They used old blankets to create a soft nest in the bathtub, ensuring Ash would have somewhere comfortable but contained to rest. "The trick is making them feel secure," Jonas explained as they worked. "Once they feel safe, they're more likely to accept help. With gentle patience." Jonas showed Collie how to coax Ash from behind the couch. His movements were slow and deliberate, his voice a steady murmur of encouragement. Eventually, they managed to transfer the kitten to the bathroom sanctuary. "You've got to be firm but gentle with the feeding," Jonas demonstrated, showing Collie how to hold the bottle at the right angle. This time, Ash accepted a few sips of formula. "I don't know how to thank you," Collie said, watching in amazement as Ash finally allowed them to examine her injured leg. Jonas smiled, carefully applying antibiotic ointment to the wound. "Just doing what's right. But listen, you need to be careful. Frank Caraway isn't someone to take lightly." The animal control director. Collie's stomach clenched. He's known for being a stickler for rules. "I've crossed paths with him before during wildlife shoots. He doesn't appreciate anyone challenging his authority." As if on cue, Collie's phone buzzed with an email from the clinic. Frank Caraway had scheduled an inspection of all departments for the following week. Her hands grew cold as she read the message. "He's already suspicious," she whispered. Jonas finished bandaging Ash's leg. "Then we'll have to be smarter. I can help you keep Ash here while you're at work. I mainly shoot in the mornings and evenings anyway." "Why are you helping me?" Collie asked suddenly. "You don't even know me. You don't even know me." Jonas was quiet for a moment, watching as Ash finally settled into the nest they'd made, her small body relaxing for the first time since she'd arrived. "Because 10 years ago, I watched someone choose protocol over compassion, and an animal died unnecessarily. I swore I'd never stand by and let that happen again if I could help it." Collie nodded, understanding completely. She looked at Ash, who had finally fallen asleep, her bandaged leg tucked carefully beneath her. "Mr. Caraway was at the clinic today," she said softly. "I saw him talking with Dr. Morrison after I took Ash. He kept looking at my office." "We'll be careful," Jonas assured her. "I'll help you set up a better long-term space for Ash tomorrow. For now, get some rest. You've had a long day." As Jonas gathered his things to leave, he paused at the door. "You did a brave thing today, Collie. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." After he left, Collie sat on the floor outside her bathroom, listening to Ash's soft breathing. She knew she had a difficult road ahead, But for the first time since leaving the clinic, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Through the bathroom door, she heard Ash stir and let out a tiny mew. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, both to the kitten and herself. "We're going to be okay." Collie's morning started with a phone call that made her stomach drop. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, spoke in a panicked voice about breaking news on the local station. 3 sheep had been killed on the Miller farm just outside Pine Valley overnight. Rushing to turn on her small television, Collie watched in horror as Frank Caraway, the animal control director, stood before news cameras. His stern face filled the screen as he spoke with authority. "We have reason to believe these attacks are the work of a bobcat," Frank declared, his eyes narrowing. "And I must inform the public that one of our interns recently interfered with the proper protocol. Regarding a captured bobcat kitten, this reckless decision may have put our community at risk." Collie's heart pounded as she glanced at Ash, who was curled up peacefully in her makeshift den. A covered cat bed in the corner of the living room. The kitten had been here all night, still recovering from her injuries. There was no way she could have been responsible. The story spread through Pine Valley like wildfire. At the grocery store that afternoon, Collie felt the stares and heard the whispers. Mrs. Parker, who usually chatted with her about gardening, hurried past without meeting her eyes. The cashier barely spoke to words while ringing up her purchases. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned citizens on social media. "How could you put our children at risk?" One read. "What were you thinking?" demanded another. Each notification felt like a physical blow. Walking back to her apartment, Collie noticed a group of mothers hurrying their children to the other side of the street. As she approached, their actions stung worse than any harsh words could. "Collie," a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Jonas Hale jogging toward her, his camera bag bouncing against his hip. The wildlife photographer's presence was a welcome sight in the sea of hostile faces. "I saw the news," he said, falling into step beside her. "You know, this is ridiculous, right? That kitten is barely strong enough to walk, let alone take down full-grown sheep." Collie clutched her grocery bags tighter. "Try telling that to everyone else. Frank has them convinced I've unleashed some kind of monster on the town. Then we'll prove them wrong," Jonas said firmly. "I've documented bobcat behavior for years. Their hunting patterns, their territories, this doesn't add up." Back in her apartment, Collie found more messages waiting on her answering machine. The first was from her supervisor at the clinic. "The board wants to meet about your internship status. The situation has become untenable." The second message made her blood run cold. "This is Frank Caraway. I'm conducting a formal investigation into the livestock attacks. Expect a visit from animal control tomorrow morning." Ash limped over to Collie, rubbing against her legs with a soft chirp. The kitten's leg was healing well, but she still needed several weeks of care before she could be considered for release into a wildlife sanctuary. "I won't let them take you," Collie whispered, reaching down to stroke the bobcat's spotted fur. "We'll figure this out." That evening, Jonas helped Collie document Ash's injuries and progress with photographs. They measured her paw prints and recorded her weight, all evidence that she was too small to have killed adult sheep. "Look at these measurements," Jonas said, comparing them to photos of the attack scene published in the local paper. "The prints of the farm are nearly twice this size. It had to be an adult bobcat, or maybe even a mountain lion." But the evidence didn't seem to matter. The next day, Collie found a crude sign, posted on her apartment building's bulletin board. "Predator sympathizer lives here." The word sympathizer had been underlined multiple times in angry red ink dot at the clinic. Her co-workers kept their distance. Dr. Morrison pulled her aside during her shift. "The board meeting is tomorrow," she said, her expression grave. "I've tried to advocate for you, Collie, but with the public outrage." "I understand," Collie replied, though her voice trembled. "But I'm not wrong about this. Ash isn't the culprit." That night, Collie sat on her small balcony, watching the sunset with Ash curled in her lap. The kitten had grown more trusting each day, showing none of the aggressive behavior everyone feared. Below, she could see people pointing up at her apartment, shaking their heads in disapproval. Jonas stopped by with dinner. Neither of them had mentioned it, but he seemed to understand that Collie had been avoiding the local restaurants where she used to be welcomed. They ate Chinese takeout while discussing their options. "Frank's investigation is just a show," Jonas said between bites of lo mein. "He's looking for someone to blame. And you're an easy target. But we'll keep gathering evidence. The truth has to count for something." Collie nodded, but she felt the weight of the community's judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Her dream of becoming a veterinarian seemed to be slipping away, all because she'd followed her heart instead of protocol. The next morning brought more news of attacks. This time, chickens at the Thompson farm. The media circus grew, with Reporters camping outside her apartment building. Frank Caraway's voice boomed from every local channel, warning about the dangers of wildlife and misguided bleeding hearts. Collie watched from her window as animal control vehicles circled the neighborhood. She knew they were waiting, hoping to catch her making a mistake. But as she looked at Ash, peacefully batting at a toy mouse, she knew she couldn't give up. The kitten deserved a chance, even if it meant facing the entire town's disapproval. "We'll prove them wrong," she whispered to Ash, echoing Jonas's words. Together. After another tense day at the clinic, Collie found Jonas waiting outside her apartment, his camera bag slung over his shoulder and an intense look in his eyes. "I need to show you something," he said, following her inside. "I've been tracking the animal movements in the valley, trying to make sense of these attacks." Jonas spread out a map on Collie's kitchen table. Red marks dotted the landscape, indicating where livestock had been found injured or killed. Ash watched curiously from her perch on the windowsill as Jonas pointed to a pattern emerging. "See these clusters? They're all along old hunting trails, places most people don't know about anymore. But look what I found." He pulled out his camera and showed Collie several photographs. The images revealed crude metal traps partially hidden. In the underbrush, their steel teeth rusty and cruel. "Illegal traps," Collie breathed, her heart sinking. "But who would?" "That's not all," Jonas continued, his voice dropping lower. "I followed the trails back, found fresh tire tracks, supplies left behind. These aren't random poachers, this is organized." He hesitated before adding, "And I think Frank Caraway is involved." Collie stared at him. "Frank? But he's the animal control director." "Exactly. Perfect cover." Jonas pulled out more photos showing Frank's truck parked near the trapping sites late at night. Another showed him speaking with two men she didn't recognize, exchanging something. "That looks suspiciously like an envelope. I've been watching for days," Jonas explained. "Frank meets with these guys regularly. They're using the traps to catch valuable for animals. But they're not careful about what gets caught. That's why we're seeing injured livestock. They're collateral damage." The pieces started falling into place, and Frank's using Ash as a scapegoat, Collie said slowly. "He's directing attention toward her to cover up what's really happening. It gets worse," Jonas said grimly. "I did some digging into the department's records. There are dozens of reports about trapped animals that were never investigated. Frank's been taking bribes to look the other way for years." Collie sank into a chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just about saving one bobcat anymore. It was about exposing a system of corruption that was hurting both wildlife and local farmers. She looked at Ash, who had dozed off in the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window. "We need proof," she said finally. "Something concrete that shows what's really going on." Jonas nodded. "I've started documenting everything. The trap locations, the meetings, the money changing hands. But we have to be careful. Frank has a lot of influence in this town, and he's already painted you as the villain." They spent the next few hours mapping out the evidence they had and what they still needed. Jonas had managed to photograph serial numbers on some of the traps, which could be traced. He'd also captured clear images of Frank accepting what appeared to be payments from the poachers. "The farmers need to know their animals aren't being killed by predators," Collie said. "They're being injured by these illegal traps. That's why the wounds look so different from normal animal attacks." "Exactly," Jonas agreed. "And that's why Frank's been pushing the Bobcat story so hard. He needs everyone looking in the wrong direction." As they talked, Collie felt a mix of anger and determination rising within her. She'd been ostracized, nearly lost her career, all because she'd tried to save one innocent life. Meanwhile, Frank had been profiting from the suffering of countless animals. "We need to be smart about this," Jonas cautioned. "Frank won't go down without a fight, and he's got friends in high places." Collie looked at her phone, where another angry message from the clinic board awaited. Her career was already hanging by a thread, but now she understood that the stakes were even higher than she'd imagined. "Whatever it takes," she said firmly. "We have to stop them." They worked late into the night, organizing their evidence and planning their next moves. Outside, the valley grew quiet under a blanket of stars, while inside, a small bobcat kitten slept peacefully, unaware that she had become the catalyst for exposing a web of corruption that threatened the entire community. The golden afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees as Jonas and Collie crouched behind a fallen log, his camera clicking softly as he documented yet another illegal trap hidden in the underbrush. Collie's heart raced as she carefully marked its location on their makeshift map. "That's the 7th one we've found this week," she whispered, her voice tight with concern. "And they're all concentrated in the same area." Jonas lowered his camera, his expression grim. "These aren't amateur traps either. They're professional grade, expensive stuff. Whoever's setting them has serious backing. Back at Collie's apartment, they spread their evidence across her kitchen table, photographs of the traps, detailed notes of locations, and dates of the livestock attacks. Ash watched them from her special corner, her injured leg now healing nicely under Collie's care. "Look at this," Jonas said, pointing to their timeline. "Every reported attack happened within half a mile of where we found these traps. And here," he pulled out a document. "I got these records from the county clerk." Frank filed inspection reports claiming he checked these areas and found nothing suspicious. Collie's fingers trembled as she examined the papers. "He's lying. These reports are dated the same day as we found active traps." "Exactly. He's covering for someone." Jonas ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "But we need more concrete proof of the connection." They worked late into the evening, organizing their findings and planning their next steps. Collie felt exhausted but determined. The soft padding of Ash's footsteps provided a comforting backdrop to their work. As night fell, Collie stepped onto her small back porch to clear her head. The evening air was thick with the scent of pine needles and approaching rain. Ash followed her outside, moving more confidently now despite her healing injury. Suddenly, Ash's ears perked up and her body tensed. Before Collie could react, she heard the distinctive rattle that made her blood run cold. There, coiled less than 3 feet away, was a large rattlesnake. Its warning sound cutting through the quiet night. Time seemed to freeze. Collie's muscles locked in place, her heart thundering in her chest. But before she could even think about backing away, Ash sprang into action. The Bobcat Kitten positioned herself between Collie and the snake, her small body crouched protectively for bristling. As she let out a fierce hiss, the snake recoiled, momentarily confused by this unexpected challenger. In that crucial moment, Ash swatted at it with lightning speed, careful to stay out of striking range. The snake, faced with this determined defender, finally slithered away into the darkness. Collie's legs gave out, and she sank to the porch floor, trembling. Ash immediately turned to her, pushing her small head against Collie's hand, checking if she was okay. Tears welled up in Collie's eyes as she gathered the kitten close. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "You beautiful, brave girl." Jonas, who had heard the commotion, rushed outside. "What happened? Are you all right?" Through tears and laughter, Collie recounted the incident. "She protected me." "Jonas, everyone thinks she's dangerous, but she just risked her life to save mine." Jonas knelt beside them, gently scratching behind Ash's ears. "Well, that settles it. We're not giving up this fight." Frank and his poacher friends picked the wrong people to mess with. Back inside, as they resumed their work with renewed vigor, Collie couldn't stop glancing at Ash. The Bobcat Kitten had settled into her favorite spot, grooming herself as if she hadn't just performed an act of extraordinary bravery. In that moment, Collie knew with absolute certainty that she would do whatever it took to protect this remarkable creature who had protected her. "We need to be smart about this," Jonas said, spreading out a fresh sheet of paper. "Frank has influence in town, and these poachers clearly have resources. We'll need to build an airtight case." Collie nodded, her determination stronger than ever. "Then that's exactly what we'll do. Whatever it takes, however long it takes." She reached over to stroke Ash's fur, feeling the quiet purr under her fingers. "She's worth fighting for." They all are. They worked late into the night, methodically organizing their evidence and planning their next moves. The bond between Collie and Ash had grown even stronger, forged in a moment of crisis and sealed with mutual trust. As they continued their investigation, they knew they weren't just fighting for one bobcat anymore. They were fighting for justice in Pine Valley itself. The golden afternoon sun filtered through the pine trees as Jonas and Collie crouched behind a fallen log, his camera clicking softly as he documented yet another illegal trap. The metal teeth of the device glinted menacingly in the dappled light, a stark reminder of the cruelty they were fighting against. "That's the 4th one we've found today," Collie whispered, carefully marking the location on her map. Her hands trembled slightly as she remembered finding Ash in a similar trap just weeks ago. How many more animals have to suffer because of Frank's greed? Jonas lowered his camera and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're building a solid case, Collie. Each photo, each documented location, it's all evidence against Frank and his poacher friends." Back at Collie's apartment, Ash had grown stronger with each passing day. The Bobcat Kitten's injured leg was healing well, and her golden eyes now held a spark of life that had been missing when Collie first rescued her. Collie had converted her small living room into a recovery space, with climbing platforms and hiding spots that helped Ash feel secure while building her strength. That evening, after another long day of gathering evidence, Collie sat cross-legged on her living room floor, reviewing their findings. Photos were spread across the carpet, showing not only the illegal traps but also documented meetings between Frank and known poachers. Jonas had managed to capture several suspicious exchanges through his telephoto lens. "Look at this, girl," Collie said softly to Ash, who was perched on a nearby platform. "We're getting closer to proving what Frank's been up to." The Bobcat Kitten watched her with intelligent eyes, tail swishing gently. Collie stood up to get her notebook from the kitchen counter, stretching her tired muscles. The evening air was warm and still, coming through the open window. As she reached for her notebook, a soft rustle caught her attention. Before she could fully turn around, Ash suddenly leaped from her perch with surprising speed and force, knocking Collie sideways. A sharp rattle cut through the quiet apartment. Collie's heart stopped as she saw the rattlesnake coiled near where she had been standing just seconds before. It must have slithered in through the open window. Drawn by the warmth of the apartment, Ash stood between Collie and the snake, her small body tense and protective. Letting out a low warning growl that seemed too big for her size, the snake struck. But Ash was quicker. With remarkable agility, especially considering her still healing leg, the Bobcat Kitten dodged the strike and swiped at the snake with her paw, forcing it to retreat. The rattlesnake, faced with an unexpectedly fierce opponent, slithered quickly back out the window. Collie sat frozen on the floor, her heart pounding. Ash immediately turned to her, limping slightly from the sudden exertion, and pressed against her leg, letting out a soft chirping sound that Collie had come to recognize as concerned. Tears welled up in Collie's eyes as she gently stroked Ash's fur. This wild creature, whom she had risked everything to save, had just put herself in danger to protect her. The bond between them, already strong, suddenly felt unbreakable. "You saved my life," Collie whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ash responded by bumping her head against Collie's hand, purring softly. The sound, so domestic from a wild animal, made Collie smile through her tears. The next morning, when Jonas arrived with his camera gear for another day of evidence gathering, Collie recounted the previous night's events. Her voice still shook slightly as she described Ash's protective intervention. "That's incredible," Jonas said, watching Ash doze in a patch of sunlight. When you first decided to save her, I thought you were just being kind. But now, I see it's more than that. You'd have a real connection." Collie nodded, looking at the sleeping bobcat with fierce determination. "She's worth everything we're risking." "Jonas, what Frank and his poacher friends are doing, it's not just illegal, it's cruel. How many other animals like Ash have suffered because of their greed?" They spent the morning organizing their evidence, photos of the illegal traps, documented locations, timestamps of Frank's meetings with the poachers, and even some distant shots of money changing hands. Ash watched them work, occasionally coming over to investigate their activities, her trust in both humans now complete. "We're almost ready," Jonas said, reviewing their collection of evidence. "Just a few more documented connections between Frank and the poachers, and we'll have enough to take to the authorities." Collie reached out to scratch behind Ash's ears, earning a contented purr. The small act of trust from the wild animal reminded her exactly why they were fighting so hard. It wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting the innocent creatures who couldn't protect themselves. Looking at Ash, remembering how she had placed herself between Collie and danger without hesitation, Collie felt a renewed surge of determination. They would expose Frank's corruption, stop the poaching, and ensure that no other animal would suffer as Ash had. The Bobcat Kitten had shown her that even the wildest creatures were capable of loyalty and love, and that was worth fighting for at all cost. Deep in the dense pine forest outside Pine Valley, Collie and Jonas had found temporary refuge in an old ranger's cabin. The wooden structure, weathered but still sturdy, provided them the perfect hideout while they planned their next move. Ash seemed more at ease here, closer to her natural habitat, though she stayed faithfully by Collie's side. One afternoon, while sorting through Jonas's extensive collection of wildlife photographs, Collie's hand froze over a particular image. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared at the photograph, a female bobcat, strikingly similar to Ash, lying motionless near one of the illegal traps they had documented. "Jonas," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. When did you take this?" Jonas moved closer, examining the photograph. "About 3 months ago. It was one of the first pieces of evidence I gathered against Frank's operation." He paused, noticing Collie's pale face. "What is it?" Collie's hands trembled as she held the photo. "Look at the markings. They're almost identical to Ash's. And the location." She pulled out their map of documented trap sites. "This is exactly where Ash was found, injured and alone." The realization hit them both at the same time. This wasn't just any bobcat. This was Ash's mother, killed by the very poachers Frank had been protecting. Ash, sensing Collie's distress, patted over and pressed against her leg. Collie sank to her knees, wrapping her arms around the young bobcat. "Oh, Ash," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. This is why you were all alone." Jonas sat down heavily in a nearby chair, running a hand through his hair. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "It's not just about saving one kitten anymore. It's about justice for all the animals they've killed, all the families they've destroyed." Collie wiped her eyes, a new determination settling over her features. "We need to go public," she declared, standing up. "We have enough evidence now. Your photographs, the documented trap locations, the meetings with poachers. People need to see what's really happening in these woods." Jonas nodded, already pulling out his laptop. "I've been organizing the evidence chronologically," he explained, opening folders of carefully cataloged photographs. "We have clear shots of Frank meeting with known poachers, exchanging money, even pointing out areas where they could set their traps. They spent hours organizing their case, creating a compelling narrative that would be impossible to ignore." Jonas's photographs told a devastating story: the systematic destruction of local wildlife, the illegal traps that killed indiscriminately, and the corruption that allowed it all to continue. "Look at this," Jonas said, pointing to a series of timestamps. Frank's meetings with the poachers always coincided with reports of missing or injured wildlife. He was giving them information about patrol schedules, helping them avoid detection. Collie stroked Ash's fur absently, her mind racing. "We need to make sure this reaches the right people. Once we go public, Frank will do everything he can to discredit us. I have contacts at the Regional Wildlife Protection Agency," Jonas offered, "and several environmental journalists who would be very interested in this story. We can release everything simultaneously, make it too big for Frank to suppress." As they worked, Ash watched them intently, as if understanding the gravity of what they were doing. The young bobcat had grown stronger during their time in hiding, her injured leg almost fully healed. Yet she showed no interest in returning to the wild, remaining loyally by Collie's side. "You know," Collie said softly, looking at Ash, "when I first found her, I thought I was just saving one life. But now I see it was about so much more. She's living proof of what these poachers have done, and what they're still doing." Jonas reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "We're going to stop them, Collie. For Ash, for her mother, and for all the other animals they've hurt." The truth about Ash's mother had transformed their mission. What began as one woman's fight to save a single bobcat kitten had become a battle for justice, for both the wild creatures of Pine Valley and the natural balance that Frank and his poachers had so callously disrupted. Together, they began preparing their evidence for release, knowing that once they took this step, there would be no turning back. But with Ash as their living testimony to the cost of corruption and the power of compassion, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Dawn broke over the pine forest as Collie and Jonas prepared to send their evidence to multiple news outlets. The morning air was crisp, and fog hung between the trees like ghostly curtains. Ash paced near the cabin's door, her spotted fur bristling with an uncharacteristic tension. "Something's wrong," Collie muttered, watching the bobcat's agitated movements. She walked to the window, scanning the misty forest. Through the thick fog, dark shapes moved between the trees. Jonas quickly grabbed his laptop and camera gear. "Frank's men," he whispered urgently. "They must have tracked us here." Collie's heart raced as she gathered their evidence into a waterproof bag. They hadn't sent the files yet. Everything they'd collected about Frank's corruption was still with them. She scooped up Ash, who squirmed anxiously in her arms. "Back door," Jonas directed, leading them through the cabin. They slipped out just as heavy footsteps thundered onto the front porch. The forest was treacherous in the fog. Wet leaves slipped under their feet as they ran, trying to put distance between themselves and their pursuers. Shouts echoed behind them, accompanied by the crack of branches being broken underfoot. "Split up," Jonas called out, veering left. "I'll draw them away. You get Ash to safety." Before Collie could protest, Ash wriggled free from her arms and darted into the underbrush. "No," Collie gasped, plunging after the bobcat. The fog swallowed her whole as she ran, branches whipping at her face. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Collie's lungs burned as she ran, desperately searching for any sign of Ash in the misty forest. A twig snapped behind her, and she spun around to find Frank himself emerging from the fog. His face twisted with anger. "You've caused enough trouble," he snarled, advancing slowly. "Where's the evidence?" Collie backed away, her hand clutching the bag containing their documentation. "We know everything, Frank. About the poachers, the bribes, Ash's mother. All of it." "You don't know anything," Frank spat, lunging forward suddenly. His hand caught Collie's arm in a painful grip. "You're just a naive girl who couldn't follow simple orders." A low growl cut through the fog. Ash appeared on a fallen log, her yellow eyes fixed on Frank. Though still young, the bobcat's protective instinct was clear in her stance. "Call off your pet," Frank demanded, his grip tightening. "Before my men find it, and put it down. And put it down." Collie struggled against his hold. "She's not a pet. She's proof of your corruption, proof that you've been helping poachers destroy these forests." More figures emerged from the fog, Frank's men closing in. Collie heard Jonas shouting in the distance, but he seemed too far away to help. Frank reached for the bag containing their evidence, but Collie twisted away. Ash chose that moment to act. The bobcat launched herself from the log, not attacking, but creating enough of a distraction for Collie to break free. She stumbled backward, clutching the precious evidence. "Get that animal!" Frank roared as Ash disappeared into the fog again. His men crashed through the underbrush in pursuit, their heavy boots destroying the delicate forest floor. Collie ran, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could hear Frank behind her, his breath ragged with fury. The fog made every direction look the same, and she realized with growing panic that she had no idea where she was running. A steep embankment appeared suddenly through the mist. Collie skidded to a stop, loose stones clattering down the slope. Frank's footsteps grew closer. She was cornered. There's nowhere to go. Frank's voice came through the fog. "Give me the evidence and maybe we can work something out." Collie clutched the bag tighter, backing up until her heels hit the edge of the embankment. "You killed her mother," she accused. "You let those poachers destroy families all for money. It's business." Frank emerged from the mist, his face hard. "Something a bleeding heart like you wouldn't understand." More shouts echoed through the trees. Frank's men were still chasing Ash, their pursuit taking them further into the forest. Collie silently prayed the bobcat would stay safe, would somehow find her way back to Jonas. Frank took another step forward, reaching for the bag. "Last chance, Collie. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The fog swirled around them, thick and oppressive. Collie could feel loose stones shifting under her feet at the embankment's edge. She was trapped, with Frank closing in and their crucial evidence at risk of being destroyed. The situation had turned from a fight for justice into something far more dangerous, a physical threat that made her pulse race with fear. The fog parted just enough for Collie to see Frank reach for something at his belt. Her heart stopped as he pulled out a hunting rifle, its metal gleaming dully in the weak light. "I won't let you ruin everything," Frank growled, raising the weapon. But he wasn't aiming at Collie. His sights were trained on something moving. In the mist behind her, Ash. "No." Collie screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the deafening crack of the rifle. In that same instant, a blur of tawny fur launched through the air. Ash's claws raked across Frank's face as she crashed into him, sending the rifle's shot wide. The bullet splintered bark from a nearby tree instead of finding its intended target. Frank howled in pain and rage, blood streaming from the deep scratches across his cheek. He stumbled backward, dropping the rifle as he clutched at his face. But Ash's victory was short-lived. Her leap had carried her directly into one of the poacher's traps hidden in the underbrush. The steel jaws snapped shut with a sickening sound. Ash's agonized cry pierced the fog. Collie rushed forward without thinking, falling to her knees beside the trapped bobcat. Blood matted Ash's fur where the metal teeth bit into her leg. She thrashed in panic, only making the injury worse. "Hold still, sweet girl," Collie pleaded, tears streaming down her face as she wrestled with the trap's mechanism. Her hand slipped on the blood-slicked metal, and the sharp edges sliced into her palms. But she wouldn't stop, until Ash was free. Jonas burst through the trees, taking in the scene in an instant. He tackled Frank just as the man was reaching for his fallen rifle. They grappled in the wet leaves, Jonas managing to pin Frank face down despite the larger man's struggles. "I've got him," Jonas shouted to Collie. "Free Ash." Collie's bleeding hands finally found purchase on the trap's release. She threw all her weight into it, straining until the springs gave way with a metallic screech. The jaws opened and Ash limped free, leaving bright red drops on the forest floor. "It's okay. You're okay," Collie soothed, though her voice shook. She tore strips from her shirt to bind both Ash's leg and her own lacerated palms. The bobcat stayed unnaturally still, allowing the treatment, a testament to how far their trust had grown. More voices approached through the fog, but these were different from Frank's men. The sharp commands and radio static identified them as state police, summoned by Jonas's emergency call before they'd fled the cabin. "Over here," Jonas called out, still restraining a cursing Frank. "We've got everything documented, the poaching operation, the bribes, all of it." Officers emerged from the mist, quickly taking control of Frank, as they read him his rights. Collie couldn't help but notice how small and ordinary he looked in handcuffs. No longer the terrifying figure who had held such power over her life. "The evidence is all here," Jonas said, pulling out his camera. Photos of the illegal traps, documentation of payments, everything connecting him to the poaching ring. And now attempted assault with a deadly weapon, too. Frank's face twisted with hate as he was led away. You don't understand what you've done, he spat. This town needed me, needed what I provided. What this town needs is justice, Kali replied firmly, cradling the injured Ash against her chest. For every animal your greed has hurt, for every law you've broken, for every trust you've betrayed. She watched as Frank disappeared into the fog between two officers, his protest fading into the damp air. The nightmare was finally ending. Her hands throbbed and Ash's blood had soaked through her makeshift bandages, but they were alive. They had one. Jonas knelt beside her, gently examining her injured palms. You need medical attention, he said. Softly. Both of you do. Kali nodded, the adrenaline beginning to fade into exhaustion. I can't believe she saved me, she whispered, looking down at Ash. The bobcat's eyes were half closed with pain, but she still pressed closer to Kali's warmth. She could have run, but she came back. She knows who her real family is. Jonas smiled, helping Kali to her feet. Come on, let's get you both taken care of. Then we can make sure Frank faces everything he's done. The morning sun painted Pine Valley in soft golden hues. As Kali stood before the gathered wildlife experts, her heart felt both heavy and light. As they confirmed what she had known would eventually come, Ash was ready to return to the wild. The rehabilitation has been remarkable, Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead wildlife veterinarian, explained while reviewing Ash's latest medical charts. Her injuries have healed completely, and she's maintained her natural hunting instincts. She's ready. Kali nodded, fighting back tears. She had known this day would come, had prepared for it, but the reality still caught her breath. Through the observation window, she watched Ash prowling in her temporary enclosure. Strong and confident, so different from the broken kitten she'd first saved. Jonas placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You gave her this chance, he said. Softly. You fought for her when no one else would. The next morning, they loaded Ash's transport cage into Jonas's truck and drove to the protected reserve. The location had been carefully chosen, miles from any settlements, rich with prey, and most importantly, safe from poachers. Frank's arrest had led to the dismantling of several poaching rings, making the wilderness safer for all wildlife. The drive was quiet, filled with the weight of upcoming farewell. Kali sat in the back with Ash's cage, speaking softly to the bobcat who had changed her life. You're going home, sweet girl, she whispered. You're going to be free. At the release site, Kali took several deep breaths to steady herself. The preserve stretched before them, a vast expanse of pristine forest. Jonas helped her carry the cage to the designated spot, then stepped back to give her space for this final moment. With trembling fingers, Kali opened the cage door. Go on, she encouraged, her voice breaking. It's okay now. Ash emerged cautiously, her muscular form moving with fluid grace. At the tree line, she paused and turned back. Their eyes met one final time. Wild amber meeting terror-filled blue. In that gaze was everything they had been through together. The fight for survival. The bond of trust. The triumph over those who would have destroyed them both. Then, with a flick of her tufted ears, Ash disappeared into the forest. Kali's composure finally broke. She sank to her knees, sobbing, not in sadness, but in overwhelming relief and joy. Jonas was there immediately, wrapping her in his arms. Let it out, he murmured, holding her close. You did it, Kali. You really did it. As her tears subsided, Kali became aware of another presence. Dr. Chen had arrived, watching the release with approval. Ms. Renard, she said, approaching with a warm smile, I have a proposition for you. Kali stood, wiping her eyes as Dr. Chen continued. The Wildlife Rescue Foundation has been watching your work with Ash closely. Your dedication, your instincts, they're exactly what we need. We'd like to offer you a permanent position as our wildlife rehabilitation specialist. The offer stunned Kali. But my internship, after everything that happened, was proof of your integrity and commitment. Dr. Chen finished firmly. We need people who will stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Especially then, joy bloomed in Kali's chest as the full impact of the moment hit her. She had not only saved Ash, she had found her true calling. Looking at Jonas, she saw his proud smile and something more in his eyes. A promise of possibilities yet to unfold. Yes, Kali said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I accept. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these were different. Tears of triumph, of release, of joy pure and complete. She had fought against impossible odds, had stood her ground when everyone doubted her, and had emerged stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. In saving Ash, she had saved herself. discovering a strength she never knew she possessed. As she stood there between Jonas and Dr. Chen, watching the forest where Ash had disappeared, Kali felt the rightness of everything settle into place. She had found her path, her purpose, and perhaps, glancing at Jonas's warm smile, even love. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the forest in shades of hope and promise. Somewhere in those woods, a young bobcat moved freely, safe and strong, living proof that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from simply refusing to look away when others suffer. Kali had learned that lesson well, and she would carry it forward into all the days to come. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.